Somalia, like many other countries, has suffered terribly because of conflict. Not just the devastating 1991, periodic droughts, and now the government faces a whole set of complex challenges, not unique to fragile states, of course. Very low revenue base, hard to framework for government that provides the legal monopoly on security, and also in terms of many different interests competing within this framework. Mobilizing services are absolutely critical to buying the legitimacy of government. Without revenues, that's never going to happen. But there have been gains in Somalia, but it still continues to struggle from the major structural problems that most fragile states suffer. Low revenues, low services, contested boundaries, and an extremely complex environment for aid services to be delivered. After 20 years, there is still not a clear strategic plan that's shared by government and by the international community. At a global level, there's a general tendency to believe that major interstate conflict no longer occurs. I mean, obviously recent events in Afghanistan and Iraq and Libya perhaps doesn't reinforce that in part, but the general belief with nearly 60 countries which are classified as fragile states, there's the nature of conflict, the nature of violence, and the opportunities of criminality within that weak and fragile state environment has really changed the nature of the conflict debate. One of the biggest challenges in a conflict environment for the international community is how best to engage. Now, frequently there is no clear roadmap, there's no political consensus, and often no political settlement. And aid itself generally, which is predicated on poverty reduction and the creation of an enabling environment, in which case the private sector will drive growth. But in most fragile states, well, there isn't such an enabling environment. And much of the investment ends up in building false state capacities, consultancy missions that create reports which are never read. And one of the biggest challenges facing the international community is how to refactor aid, to shape aid to be more relevant to the post-conflict or fragile state environment. Many people live in dire and often desperate conditions, and for these people, really about getting access to basic and essential services is really a precondition that they can start to believe that the government they have is a government that they have a vested interest to support. Every single year, the World Conflict Report assesses the real cost of conflict on a global level. There is no standard set of international baselines that assesses that, and therefore we cannot see the costs of conflict and the potential benefits of its avoidance. Costing conflict, of course, will not be easy. There are many challenges. Are these the direct costs, the indirect costs, the transboundary costs over time? But at least we'll start. We'll establish a methodology, and year on year, based on that methodology, we will be able to monitor the global impact of changes in conflict and fragility over time. On an annual basis, the World Conflict Report seeks to bring new insights and analysis, creating a common understanding where in fact there isn't one at the moment, on what the core drivers of conflict are, and what are the best mechanisms for mitigating those risks, both internationally and then domestically as well. At the end of the day, conflict is in fact a very human experience. And for many people who've been affected by conflict, whose countries have been devastated, generations of people have been living without basic and essential services and human rights. So beyond the conflict, re-establishing the basic institutions of governance and state requires often significant money that governments don't have. Of all the essential lessons that we have learned about conflict, of no surprise really, is a very strong correlation between conflict and poverty. And the poverty side of the conflict equation is something which the World Conflict Report will look at in great detail.